Hello, everybody. My name is McConaghy. I'm an undergraduate student studying environmental engineering and sustainability. And this summer, for my sustainability fellowship, I worked with the city of Dover to conduct their greenhouse gas inventory. So, for a little background into what a greenhouse gas inventory is, it's a detailed record of a particular calendar or fiscal year and consists of the emissions from the set boundaries being looked at. For this inventory in particular, the boundaries consisted of both municipal owned and operated operations as well as community, which involves both residential and commercial emissions. Within this inventory, I analyzed Scope 1 emissions, and these are the emissions that result from activities occurring directly within the city. So these look like stationary fuels, municipal fuel consumption, fertilizer use, and Scope 2 emissions, which consist of purchased electricity from the grid, and finally Scope 3 emissions, which are the out-of-boundary/indirect emissions produced by the city, and these can sometimes be associated with the embodied carbon from these products. This consisted of wastewater, employee commuting, employee travel, solid waste, school food, Amtrak, and transmission and distribution losses. Municipalities and communities have a responsibility to not only recognize their role in the climate crisis, but begin to take effective action and reduce and mitigate their output. Dover, in particular, plays a role in this, as it's the most populous city in the seacoast and fifth most populous in New Hampshire, making its impact substantial and its role immediate. Through this inventory, Dover now has the capacity to not only further understand where they've made progress towards emission reductions, where there have been some shortfalls, and what they can do to progress in their goals towards reducing their footprint. Now, for a little bit of a project-specific overview, the goal of this project was to conduct a municipal and community greenhouse gas inventory for calendar year 2025, ultimately as an update from the 2017 baseline. It is key to note that the 2017 inventory was exclusively for municipal operations as well as overall nitrogen output, while this inventory involved the community aspect, which greatly altered the results, as you'll see in the next slide. With this information, I worked to develop a comprehensive report detailing where exactly Dover has decreased emissions and where there have been some increases. And finally, I provided some recommendations for the future to help them align with their resiliency and master plan, both of which help detail Dover's goals for a sustainable future. The methodology behind this report consisted of outreach for data to various departments, organizations, and contractors. And then with this data, I was analyzing it and comparing it to the previous baseline to get an understanding of where patterns may or may not have occurred. This data was then input into SciMap, which is the Sustainability Indicator Management and Analysis platform created by the University of New Hampshire, which acts as a reporting mechanism by having pre-built emission factors, making the process of reporting just a little bit more streamlined. And finally, I inputted this into the final report. Just a quick note of some progress since the previous report, being that Dover has invested in solar arrays for several locations throughout the city, including the high school, Children's Museum, and most recently the wastewater treatment plant, with plans for several more locations. The school district has implemented meatless Mondays as a method to combat the embodied carbon associated with the consumption of meat products, and the city has transitioned to using organic fertilizer in an effort to reduce nitrogen output. Ultimately, it was found that emissions were much higher due to the inclusion of the community inventory. Unfortunately, due to the fact that it was a Tier 1 subscription to SciMap, we were only able to visualize the emissions as if it were one single entity, so it was difficult to get an improved understanding of the shifts from municipal versus community emissions. And this is a similar pattern for data collection as well, in which I often got a single number rather than having it broken down by sector, making it a little bit more difficult to pinpoint where exactly it was emitted from or what just a better idea of where it could have been sourced from. This inventory did, however, help with understanding the overall output of the city as a whole. On the right, there's a little bit more information regarding each sector and its overall contribution. So as you can see, purchased electricity contributed the most emissions, followed by stationary sources and fuel and energy related activities. Ultimately, the cumulative emissions totaled 157,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents, and below are just a few examples of what this looks like in terms of equivalency, which essentially means things that would emit the same amount of carbon. The long-term impact of this inventory is that Dover now has a comprehensive understanding of what the emissions are from each sector, giving them an improved understanding of what the future steps could be for informing the resiliency plan and helping develop long-term goals for mitigation and reduction. This also helps in terms of community outreach, as they now have a better understanding of what gaps could be filled to reduce community-based emissions. And this largely consists of an educational effort. So as a part of this role, I'd help develop different outreach materials that pertain to different ways that community members could take towards reducing their footprint. And these involve things such as reducing overall solid waste through composting, methods that can reduce stationary fuel use/natural gas use, and ways to save electricity within the home. In terms of a personal impact, this project allowed me to dive a little bit deeper into larger scale greenhouse gas accounting, I previously helped work with the University of New Hampshire to conduct their footprint, but having done it on a much larger scale, I have an improved understanding of how to analyze larger chunks of data and illustrate them in a meaningful manner. This translated greatly into the report that I had developed, in which I was relaying information to a number of audiences with various backgrounds in greenhouse gas accounting, and wanted to do so in an extremely transparent, understandable manner. So this resulted in a much larger breakdown, which also helped my comprehension throughout this process. I also learned that a lot of greenhouse gas accounting consists of not only being a little bit of a pest when it comes to sending emails, but also data extrapolation and being quite creative in your approach towards this. Whether this is using the previous inventory as your baseline to develop this, or just census data and scaling it by population. An example of this is when I had access to the fiscal year for electric consumption, but not the calendar year. So using the Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire data alongside the provided electric data, I extrapolated the numbers to get a general estimate of what the consumption would have been for 2025. Finally, I learned a lot of different resilience methods and strategies that other cities are pursuing that can be replicated in Dover, largely through investigating different climate action plans. This was especially neat as I was able to see how different efforts differ geographically as well as by population density. Yet seeing this commitment towards net zero and effective climate action was extremely uplifting, and I think it just shows that though we are a relatively small community in the grand scheme of things, we are an essential piece of the puzzle when it comes to being part of the cumulative action against climate change. Finally, I wanted to thank my mentor for this project, Lexi Merchant, whose guidance and support was immensely helpful in making this project overall very successful, along with the City of Dover Planning Department for being such wonderful hosts during my time here. Additionally, I wanted to thank my project advisor, Kiara Tennis, for your help and guidance throughout completing this project, as well as the Sustainability Institute as a whole, for giving me the opportunity to be a fellow and explore greenhouse gas accounting just a little bit more. Thank you for watching.